Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
In ancient times, treaties would be made between a king and his enemy. It was a covenantal agreement where the enemy would pledge to love the king that he was making an agreement with. Okay, so we kind of have to change our definition of love.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
Welcome back to Foundations, where we've been exploring over the last few programs the main elements of Shema, and that is that we are to obey God, that God is one or God alone, that we're to love Him. Today we're continuing on with that theme of loving God as He commanded in Shema.
We are, and it's much more dimensional. Every element is very dimensional, multidimensional when you start digging into it. It's not merely an emotion. It's not just a superficial emotional feeling that you get. It has the power to actually keep a person alive, as we saw from the story of Viktor Frankl, who was a prisoner of war for 3 years in Auschwitz, not knowing that his wife had been murdered in the adjacent camp. But the memory of her sparked this overwhelming love that he felt for her, and that got him through those horrendous 3 years of his life. That awful, awful place. That's the power of love. So where we finished off was in learning that the love commanded by God in Shema is a command to action rather than simply an emotion. Remember, we were saying that generally from our own philosophical viewpoint, we get the emotion, we have this feeling, and that then propels us to take action, to do something. Whereas what God is actually saying is, love me, obey me. Then once you obey me and the consequences of your actions are seen, then the emotion will follow. And it's based on something real, not just an emotion in and of itself. Yeah. On the previous program, what we didn't mention, but was in the notes, there's the word ve'ahavta, and it literally means you shall love. So that was the actual command, you shall love. Now, in ancient times, treaties would be made between a king and his enemy, and if they were signed, it was a covenantal agreement between these ancient peoples where the enemy would pledge to love the king that he was making an agreement with. Now, it was a pledge to loyalty, not necessarily for him to hold warm, fuzzy feelings toward that monarch. That's right. Okay, but the word that was used was love. Okay, so we kind of have to change our definition of love a little bit to get our head around it. Because if it's just an emotion, we tend to think, how can you command somebody to have that emotion? Yeah. Well, you can't command somebody to have that emotion. But the feelings come afterwards, after the obedience. Okay, so when the Israelites responded to the 10 Commandments given by Moses, they didn't respond with all these mushy feelings. They simply promised to obey them. And so loving God, again, it doesn't necessarily command warm affection, the feelings from those who worship Him. That's not what God is commanding. It's this command of loyalty, of faithful acts, of devotion, of obedience. Remember, there's the other scripture. I don't have it here in the notes. It says to obey is better than sacrifice.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
If you're just giving the sacrifice, you end up resenting it. If you are obeying because this is the show of your loyalty and your devotion and your faithfulness to God, you are obedient. It's not just this sacrifice. Then the love emotion or those feelings follow on. Now, remember King David, it's good to sort of look at some real-life examples. King David was, for the most part, he was a very faithful man toward God. The Bible says he had a heart after God, apart from some really glaringly appalling sins and misdemeanors that he committed. But remember, he was living in exile. He was being chased by his father-in-law. He'd had attempts made on his life. He was living in the backside of the desert with hundreds of reprobates that didn't fit into society. He was constantly on the run. At one stage, he went and lived with the Philistines, and there was another time he pretended like he was an insane guy dribbling in his beard. And he could have possibly, this was, as a young boy, defeated Goliath, was a champion of Israel, whom God had said was going to be king, and here he is acting like a madman and living in the desert. And he could have said, God, where are you? You're a liar. You've let me down. He could have gone off the rails, but he remained faithful. He did eventually become king. And then he had that spontaneous eruption where he literally threw off his clothes to just wearing an ephod underneath him, and he starts dancing like a silly girl in the street out of sheer love and devotion, this emotion that he felt was so overwhelming, this love that he had for God. Why? Because for years he'd been obedient, for years he'd been faithful. He'd experienced trauma and horror and attempts on his life. Could you imagine sitting there singing to the king and having a javelin thrown at you to pierce you to the wall? And all of a sudden it was too much after all this obedience, and then this emotion just flows out of him. It just erupts. And, of course, his unfortunate wife, Michael, then insults him, and her consequences for her bitterness leaves her barren, childless for the rest of her life. So these emotions that we in the West particularly long for can come, but they come as a consequence of the obedience and the faithfulness and the devotion. So
the action happens and then the emotion follows, not the other way around.
Precisely, because if we wait for the emotion, maybe that's why so many of us are sitting on our blessed assurances. Yeah. We're waiting for an emotion to motivate us to go and do some action, when really we should be being obedient to God, and the emotion will or won't come as a consequence at some point in the future. Yeah. So the truth is, though, Robbo, that in and of ourselves, we're not really capable of loving God the way we should. We don't have it in us. But the capacity to love and to be obedient comes because His Spirit indwells us. So He deserves glory for everything, because He's the one who saves us. He's the one who gives us the capacity to believe. He's the one who enables us to obey. He's the one who leads and directs us. Yeah. He's the one who equips us to do the job, and then He's the one who inspires the emotion that comes. So, it's all glory to Him.
Absolutely.
In truth.
Yeah. So you've given an example there of David from the Old Testament, how he's done that. What about some New Testament examples of how we can see that playing out as well?
Well, I guess as far as the love and devotion, or any kind of an emotional response that you would see, I think the first one that comes to my mind is of the woman who was forgiven much, and how once she'd been forgiven, she'd repented, Christ forgave her, she was overwrought. And what did she do? She wept on His feet. She cleaned His feet with her tears. She dried His feet with her hair. The overwhelming emotion that she must have felt, when that was extended to her, I can't imagine her life was the same ever again. And of course, she already had to live with the stigma that she was a disgraced or fallen, unwanted woman. That whole society looked at her that way. But she suffered all of their indignation to sit at His feet. Yeah. That's an amazing love. So our Western mind, we kind of got to change our concept or our understanding of what love is. It's much broader than that. Much, much broader than that. We're actually going to look at love a little bit more in the coming days as well, because we're supposed to love our neighbour as ourselves, and that goes on a little bit. There's so much when it comes to looking at love. But this all brings greater understanding to the passages of Shema, which is Deuteronomy 6:6. The words that I am ordering you today are to be on your heart. When it says in your heart, we think emotions, but it's just talking about the whole inner life. The whole of the inner life. It's not just this little emotion. And so anytime you read a verse in the Old Testament particularly that says heart, you could replace that with the whole inner life. So even a passage like the words that I am ordering you today are to be on your heart, the words I'm ordering you today are to be in your whole inner life. It kind of changes things because it's incorporating your emotions, your mind, your thoughts, your actions, your motivations. It's all encompassing of that. Love is not simply just an emotion.
Well, in the next program on Foundations, we're going to be looking at the next element of Shema, which is to love God with our soul.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.